Well, hello everyone, Stuckery here, and welcome back to the History of Everything podcast YouTube channel. On today's episode, we go into another dumb event, my favorite series, with today's specific story being that of the cane toad. Yet another example of when Australia drowned itself in exotic animals that proceeded to destroy their own country. But hey, if you don't know what I'm talking about, then please, allow me to explain. You see, the introduction of the cane toad, or Bufo marinus, to Australia, which was back in the 1930s, that is one of history's biggest examples of when an exotic animal release goes horribly wrong. You see, these things were originally imported from Hawaii and then released in Queensland, Australia, as a kind of biological control for beetle pests of sugarcane. The cane toad is now a well-established pest itself. With its range reaching into Queensland, the Northern Territory, New South Wales, and Western Australia, despite being less widespread than foxes or rabbits, community surveys will always consistently rank the toad as being the most hated invasive species, and it's listed as a key threatening species under the Environment Protection and Biodiversity Conservation Act of 1999. Nowadays, if you have ever heard of the cane toad, you probably understand that this was something that was released as a deliberate biological agent as a form of pest control. But not many people may know the exact story of why or how that came to be. So let's go ahead and rewind a little bit. The entire reason for the cane toad in the first place comes from sugarcane. Sugarcane had been commercially grown in Queensland since the 1860s, and the losses that were being caused by white grub attacks began to be a serious problem around the 1880s. The grubs, which have larvae of up to 13 species of native beetles, they would eat the roots of the cane, causing the plants to die. The problem was significant enough for the Queensland government to bow to pressure from cane growers and try and establish the Queensland Bureau of Sugar Experiment Stations, or BSES, in 1900. By 1935, entomologists employed by BSES had been studying the biology of the cane beetle and investigating solutions to their impacts for around 25 years. Now, not all of this was useless. Plenty of good science specifically came from these studies. The life cycles of several beetle species were described, and an understanding of their biology and ecology had been worked out, which enabled more focused control measures. There were many field and lab trials that were done in a bid to try and develop effective controls, including the use of various chemical insecticides, soil fumigation methods, biocontrols such as parasitic fungi and native insects, as well as physical removal methods and agricultural and cultivation practices. Now, some of these things seem to show a little promise, but the issue is that the majority of them were either cost prohibitive, i.e. they were too expensive to actually be worthwhile, or they simply didn't really work well. Which brings us to the toad. There was a government entomologist that was working for BSES by the name of Reginald Montgomery. He was convinced that the cane toad was the answer to the major agricultural crisis that was in the sugar industry, as cane toads had reportedly solved similar beetle problems in Hawaii, the Philippines, and Puerto Rico. In June of 1935, Montgomery traveled to Hawaii, where he captured 102 toads and then brought them back to Australia. And the toads were hardy enough that this worked. All but one of the toads managed to make it back alive. They were housed in a purpose-built enclosure that was designed to hold on to them and let them simply breed. Which breed they did, because in less than 2 months, the toads had multiplied by a factor of 24. From there, they were simply released into the wild. Now, not necessarily everyone was on board with what was happening here with the toad. There was another Australian entomologist by the name of Walter Frogat. He voiced concerns about the release about this time, writing prophetically, mind you, that this great toad, immune from enemies, omnivorous in its habits, and breeding all year round, may become as great a pest as the rabbit or cactus. Which yes, it would. He went and lobbied the federal government to exercise caution, and as a result, the Director General of Health banned any further releases of toads in December of 1935. The ban didn't actually last, though, because BSES and the sugarcane growers believed that the cane toad was the solution to their problems, so they re-petitioned the government to undo the ban, and subsequently, it was. Beginning in September of 1936, cane toads were released back into Queensland all over again. So the question at this point was, did it work? No. You see, the life history and ecology of the cane toad wasn't really understood or even considered, it seems, before it was introduced, nor was its actual interaction with the grayback beetle that it was introduced to control. First off, sugarcane can reach around 6 to 8 meters in height. The grayback beetle usually feeds in the top of the sugarcane stalk. Cane toads cannot fly or climb. Therefore, they could not reach the beetles. I can literally only imagine that if they did any kind of testing to this while the toads were still in their cage, it was some guy just plopping beetles through the cage just to see if the toads would eat it. They probably did, in which case he's like, yeah, this works. Only problem, in wild conditions, it can't actually be reached. Another problem that they had was that a number of the beetle species tended to be out during the daytime while the cane toads feed at night, so their schedules didn't really align. The species were also not seasonally compatible, so they weren't really in the same place at the same time of the year. You see, the Australian sugarcane fields were much drier than those of the cane toad's habitat in Hawaii and other places that were more tropical. So the toads needed more wet conditions in order to survive. So they quickly moved from the sugarcane fields to more moist areas. And from there, they would pretty much just eat anything in their path. That includes small lizards, snakes, frogs, tadpoles, marsupials, mice, snails, insects, pest food, and even human food if it's been left out in like trash cans or just in trash heaps. The cane toad eats many native animals, and it will often outcompete native species for food and breeding sites. Their breeding habits would also contribute to this because a female is capable of laying 8 to 30,000 eggs at a single time, sometimes twice in a year. Mind you, Australia's native frogs will only lay around 1 to 2,000 eggs per year, meaning that per the numbers game, they literally cannot compete with the cane toad's reproduction abilities. Another big issue was that the cane toad is poisonous in all stages of its life. Adults have venom glands on their upper surface that exude toxic venom when the toad is provoked. So predators, including birds, snakes, crocodiles, and even some mammals or pets, aren't able to actually eat them. Few predators in Australia have a resistance to the cane toad's venom, and therefore they die when they try to eat them. In turn, there aren't really any successful predators or agents that could stop the cane toad from exploding in terms of population, with them expanding rapidly every year at a rate of approximately 40 to 60 kilometers. Eventually, they will be all over Australia, and I can only imagine that there will be a three-way war between emus, rabbits, and toads that will soon destroy the planet. But that is probably a story for the future, if it ever actually reaches that point. Anyway, I hope that you all enjoyed today's episode. Please make sure to like, comment, subscribe. Also, check out the full podcast, which you can find a link for in the description. This is the History of Everything podcast YouTube channel, after all. And I do hope that you all have a good rest of your day. Thank you very much for watching. Goodbye, guys.